Roger Maxson was a captain in the United States Army when he was stationed at West Tech Research Facility in January of 2076. He didn't realize what things were going to occur within the next year and a half. You see, Roger started out as Captain Roger Maxson, second in command of the security team. And initially he was sent to the West Tech Research Facility, which was eventually relocated to Mariposa Military Base. Now, if you've played through some of the early Fallout games, this stuff might seem very familiar. The Mariposa Military Base is where they were doing research on the FEV, and I've mentioned the FEV in some of these other podcasts. The FEV was the Forced Evolutionary Virus. The world that Roger Maxson was in, the situation he was in, the situation the United States was in, was one of such desperation that they were looking for any leg up possible against their enemies. And one idea was forcing evolution on unsuspecting military prisoners through the application of this virus. Now, what did the FEV do? Well, originally it was planned to create super soldiers. Think of it as like a super soldier serum from the Marvel movies. And as we know with the super soldier serum in the Marvel movies, sometimes you end up with Captain America, and sometimes you end up with the Red Skull. You don't quite know what you're going to get. And at the Mariposa military base, the FEV was in a very early state. So they didn't even get the Red Skull. Oftentimes they got these horrific human monstrosities where the evolutionary virus went crazy and stretched their skin and showed their muscles and their bones and made their muscles inflate in really odd ways. Check out the Twitter feed for some of the pictures on some of the tweets this week, because you'll see some of the images that are used in the game. It's not pleasant. It's probably very painful. It is horrific. Horrific is the word that you would use to explain this. Now, I like to think about putting myself in other people's shoes. When I look at somebody's actions and I look at the things they're doing, I give them the benefit of the doubt, but I also want the information, as much information as possible, in order to make the best decision. Put yourself in the shoes of Roger Maxson, Captain Roger Maxson, second in command of the security team. Now, according to Fallout.fandom.com, the Fallout wiki, on October 10th, Maxson and his men learned about the human experiments going on in the base, causing morale to suffer a hefty blow. Imagine you're part of a security team, you're second in charge, and you come to find out that the scientists that you are protecting at the command of the United States government are doing experiments on human beings that are turning them into monstrosities. What would you do? How do you react to that? Well, it goes on and it says the original leader of the security team, Colonel Robert Spindell, suffered a nervous breakdown from this discovery, locked himself in his office, causing Maxson to assume his command. Now, it turns out that Colonel Robert Spindell commits suicide. He kills himself. He can't handle the horrors that are in front of him and doesn't know what else to do. So Captain Maxson steps up. He takes control of the situation. He takes control of the entire base, and he begins interrogating the scientists. Now, he must have had a very strong moral compass. It makes sense that somebody like Roger Maxson, somebody who goes on to found the Brotherhood of Steel, is somebody who lives their life according to ideals and tenets. Now, after interrogating the chief scientist Robert Anderson and learning what was really happening at the base, Maxson executed him. The wiki goes on to explain that 2 days later, in an attempt to find out what he knew, Maxson and his men forced open Spindell's office door in time to witness him commit suicide. After this, Maxson took full command, ordering all the scientists to be interrogated and finally executed. Disgusted with their findings, with almost every scientist stating their orders came directly from the upper echelons of the army, Maxson declared himself and his men in full desertion of the army via radio. So imagine you're in this situation. You're looking at these horrible, horrible experiments. These scientists, which seem to be just going through with their orders as if that's all they could do. And the terrible situation is so bad that you decide these people do not need to live anymore. And you kill all of them. And then you have, because your moral compass is so strong, you radio your boss, basically. You radio the United States Army and you say, hey guys, this is what's going on here. We're no longer doing this. What would you expect to happen after that? I would expect that the United States military would come after me. They would say, okay, you've gone rogue. You need to be put down. I mean, that takes a lot of guts. Now, after he tries to contact them via radio, there was no response. Nothing came back. This was 3 days before the bombs dropped. His men and their families, their wives, their children, they all moved into the base on October 20th. And as we know, the bombs fell on October 22nd, 2077. Now, the wiki goes on to explain that Maxson and his men survived the war unharmed because they were sealed inside the military base, unaware that the world had ended around them. After making sure the radiation levels outside were safe, Maxson ordered everyone to leave the military base, certain it would be targeted in the next series of strikes, and travel to the Lost Hills government bunker. After burying the scientists, Maxson's soldiers and their families began the exodus to Lost Hills. Raider attacks inflicted a heavy toll of civilian casualties, purposefully targeting them as the surviving soldiers had full power armor, including Maxson's wife. Now imagine this situation. You're taking your men, their wives, their children to a military bunker. You're bringing all of your equipment, all the power armor, probably food, all the resources you have to this bunker because you don't know what's going on and you don't know how long you're going to need these resources to survive. And already, days later, there are people who are desperate enough to attack soldiers in full power armor. Things must have been extremely desperate. Now, the wiki goes on and says, sometime later, in a proclamation to his men, Maxson declared that the United States had failed to protect its citizens and serve their needs during the years leading up to the war, and stated that they must form a new order to preserve civilization, a Brotherhood of Steel. Shortly afterwards, Maxson and his men used a communication satellite to contact other army units across the country and recruit them to the Brotherhood's cause. One such unit, based in Appalachia, was led by Elizabeth Taggarty, an old acquaintance of Maxson's. Now, this is where things connect to Fallout 76. And that's another topic for another day, but basically, this is where the connection from the West Coast to Appalachia, I don't know how the best way to pronounce that. I don't live in the area. But that's where that comes in, and the connection to the Brotherhood being started over in that area and the Scorched Plague and all that kind of stuff. Now, Maxson set up this bunker as the new headquarters of the Brotherhood of Steel, and he became the High Elder of the Brotherhood. Now, the Brotherhood is a big topic. There are a lot of instances in the Fallout games where the Brotherhood is involved during different time periods, from right at the Great War and the things that happened right after that, all the way to a few hundred years later. The Brotherhood is a society designed around an ideology, a group of people who have something greater to live for. And that's one of the themes that comes about in these Fallout games and in post-apocalyptic literature in general. The idea that when a group of people have something greater to believe in, that they're more likely to survive, they're more likely to do what's necessary in order to survive, is very common. This ideology was based around what would be called a neo-knightly order. There are knights and squires and elders. The Brotherhood was very, very cautious initially about letting anyone else into their ranks. And at different time periods throughout the games, that does adjust and change. Fallout 3, the leadership was more open to outsiders. But initially, it was these original soldiers, their families, and then some of the other army groups that they came upon who were the original individuals who are part of the Brotherhood, and then their families and their descendants. And that doesn't really leave you much hope of a group of people who are going to make it into the future, who are going to survive. So eventually some of the ideology changes as to who can be included in the group, how they are let in, what the requirements are. But just like any other ideology, or it's almost a neo-religious group, they have certain beliefs they stand for. And a lot of these beliefs are based around the situation at Mariposa. One of their beliefs is anti-super mutant. The Brotherhood is to go out of their way to clean the wasteland of super mutants. And at some points later in these games, later in the timeline, that becomes any mutants. That becomes any threat to humans in the wasteland. Another tenet to their ideology is the idea that technology needs to be preserved, and it specifically needs to be preserved by the people who will understand how to use it for the better good. And according to the Brotherhood's better good, that's for humans and basically themselves, in order to make sure that they can take care of the technology, make sure that these things are not lost to time, and that groups of raiders, other individuals in the wasteland who are less educated about these things, don't get their hands on the technology and basically ruin it. So you'll see members of the Brotherhood going off into the world to find and keep all sorts of interesting technology. Everything from medical technology, power armor, laser and plasma weaponry, a little bit in regards to things like robots, but more things that humans operate on their own, like the technology to travel across the continent on an airship. These are all things that the Brotherhood is interested in preserving. Now let's talk about the organizational structure. I noted that there are knights and other ranks within the Brotherhood of Steel, and they have specific names and specific roles. According to the wiki, the Brotherhood of Steel is organized into different ranks. Initiates are trainees who are expected to perform well enough in the training process to be promoted to senior initiates, and later to apprentices. After proving themselves, apprentices are promoted to the rank of journeyman knight or scribe. The next rank is knight sergeant or senior scribe, knight captain, and finally the leader of each of these orders is the paladin and the head scribe. Brotherhood scribes are responsible for investigating and reverse engineering the ancient technologies, maintaining the current technology of the Brotherhood, and even experimenting with new weapons and other useful devices. Scribes rarely leave the safety of the Brotherhood's bunkers and outposts, but they are sometimes called into the field to examine a piece of technology or perform a task beyond the skills of the Brotherhood's soldiers. Brotherhood knights are responsible for manufacturing the weapons and other pieces of technology used by the Brotherhood, although they also take part in combat activities. After many years of service and experience, the best knights are promoted to paladins, the pinnacle rank of the Brotherhood military. Paladins are in charge of all security and outside activities. The paladin ranks are junior paladin, paladin, senior paladin, star paladin, and head paladin. Paladins who survive to their later years become elders, and they make up the Brotherhood's ruling council. Among this branch of the Brotherhood, an additional rank, Sentinels, exists between Paladin and Elder. The leader of the council and the Brotherhood itself is the High Elder, usually descended from the Maxson family. So that explains why in some of these other games, you continue to see the Maxson name.
Oh, well, you see, I am descended from the great Roger Maxson, founder of our order. I am the last of his line. They say my soul was forged from eternal steel, but I don't believe that. I'm really just a normal boy. I was sent to the Citadel many years ago to be fostered by Elder Lions, but that was before the Western Elders lost faith in the Elder. I really don't know if I'll ever get home, but, well, I kind of like it here. Sentinel Lions has been very kind to me. She's taught me so much.
I need you to set an example for the troops. Collect technology, exterminate abominations of nature, and bring a message of stability to the people of the Commonwealth. Our ideals are what define us, Sentinel. If we can hold on to that, then we will always be victorious.
Now, there's one last thing I wanted to note. The insignia, the symbol of the Brotherhood, is one of those symbols that is very recognizable. The Brotherhood symbol, it has gears that represent their engineering knowledge, a sword, which is their will to defend themselves, and the wings represent the uplifting hope that the acquisition of lost technology represents for mankind's salvation following the devastation of the Great War. Now, the circle represents the fraternal unity that makes the organization a true brotherhood. So there are 4 symbols, and they all have meaning. Now, there is another interpretation that each of these symbols represent the different orders. For example, the sword represents the paladins, the wings represent the elders, the, quote, wings control the movement of the sword, and the large gear represents the knights, and the 2 smaller gears represent the scribes and the initiates, whose service keep the knights supplied with the information and the manpower required to get their jobs done. Now, this interpretation could also be supported by looking at the outcast's insignia, which is absent of wings, and shows that they do not need elders or their equivalents. Now, we'll dig into more Brotherhood of Steel stuff again in the future, I'm sure. This stuff is going to come up time and time again. But let's just end this section of the show with the question, what would you do if you were in Maxson's shoes? If you were part of the United States military and it was your job to protect these scientists, to fight for your country, and you find out that your country is doing horrific experiments to human beings without their permission. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe. And if you liked this episode, you'll probably like this other episode here about one of the craziest vaults in Fallout. Also, there are over 200 episodes of this podcast available already for audio platforms on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere else you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe in the wasteland.